from the Office of Assessment and Standards. This is our final webinar for the 24-25 school year. We are super excited to present to you this morning on handwriting and the 2024 South Carolina College and Career Ready ELA Standards. Brenna or Casey, if you'll go ahead and hit record and we will get started. Oh, y'all are mind readers, truly. As we get started, we have to share our AI disclaimer. So we at the South Carolina Department of Education discourage the use of artificial intelligence note catchers during our webinar sessions, only because they are not faultless and sometimes may record something in a note catcher that's not exactly what we presented or what we shared. So please don't use artificial intelligence note catchers while we're in our online sessions, especially in these webinars, and we would appreciate that. Other housekeeping to get started. Again, I'm Mandy Hawker. I'm your Elementary ELA Standards Education Associate here in the Office of Assessment and Standards. I'm happy to be with y'all today. With me, I have two of my colleagues who support ELA. I have Casey Prince Harvey, who supports secondary ELA, and then I have Brenna McCormick, who supports middle level ELA. Additionally, we have another education associate from the Office of Assessment and Standards today who is just here taking a listen at how we do our virtual trainings. We have Reese Bradley. She is our elementary social studies education associate. So we're super excited to have her here today too. She'll just be listening in as she's working on a few other things. All right. Now, as far as our note catcher and landing page, Brenna's going to drop into the chat that note catcher landing page. It's one document that has space for you to take notes throughout our session today. Those notes will correspond to different numbers throughout our presentation. So if you see the number 2, that has a space on your note catcher that has number 2 for you to record your notes there. So just for the ease of use, if you've been in our sessions before, you're familiar with that format. Now, this note catcher also serves as your landing page today. All the resources that we'll share throughout our session together today will be linked on that note catcher. So we like to refer to it as a note catcher or a landing page. Everything you need is in one tidy place. And then finally, as always, we want to support the use of your high quality instructional materials to support handwriting instruction with the strategies and suggestions that we have today. So anything that's shared or any resources that are shared throughout our session today, we ask that you use those in support of the high quality instructional materials that your district adopts. Okay. Next, if you are here and in person and listening to my voice today, you are able to receive recertification credit for participating in this session. There are 3 criteria for receiving that recertification credit. The first is live attendance and participation in this session. The next is remaining in attendance for the duration of our presentation today. And then finally is completing that feedback form at the very end of our session. So hopefully you will be with us throughout the session today and able to receive that recertification credit. This session is worth 2 hours of recertification credit. Now let's get to the good stuff, right? We're 6 minutes in and it's time to talk about the big stuff. So today's purpose for our session today.
Thank y'all.
Today's purpose is to explore the indicator expectations for handwriting that are within the 2024 South Carolina College and Career Ready ELA Standards. So we'll take a very close look at what those are and how we can support them. And then finally, we want to provide you some instructional support for handwriting instruction. And a lot of that instructional support is going to come from our new Handwriting Support Document that's finally being released today. This document has been in development for the past 1.5 years. Whew, labor of love there. Some of you served on the Handwriting Support Document Feedback Committee, and I hope you see a document today that supports the instruction of handwriting. Without any further ado, let's get started with an overview of handwriting in South Carolina. So as always, when we present from our team, from the ELA Standards team, we will always want to ask, what do the standards say? Take a minute to read this quote from page 20 in our ELA Standards document. So within our ELA Standards document, it's outlined why handwriting is included in the written communication standards of our 2024 South Carolina ELA standards. Now, let's take a little bit of a backwards look at handwriting law and the history in South Carolina. So, in 2008, cursive was in the ELA standards, but not to the extent that the Back to Basics law required that cursive be taught. So, in 2008, there was an expectation in the standards to teach cursive. In 2010, for the quick minute that South Carolina adopted the Common Core state standards, Common Core did not include cursive writing at all. Oftentimes, this can give us an indication or explains why we hear across the state that we don't teach cursive writing in South Carolina. In 2010, for that brief moment, we didn't because it wasn't required in the Common Core standards. However, in 2014, the South Carolina passed it's called Act number 275, and that required cursive writing instruction. And then in 2015, when those standards were developed, cursive was introduced in second grade. Now, that's an interesting shift to what the expectation is now. But in 2015, cursive was introduced in second grade. And then in third grade, students were asked to connect upper and lowercase letters efficiently and proportionately in cursive writing. Now let's talk about what it looks like now. So in 2024, the ELA standards were revised again. That's part of our cyclical review cycle, right? Every 7 years. So in 2024, when they were revised, the committee was tasked with making the handwriting standard more complete and with a strong vertical articulation and support. So while the law, the Back to Basics law, requires cursive handwriting, there has to be a precursor to cursive writing, right? So what does that look like? The writing committee for the 2024 revision had to adopt into their minds what that might look like. Where do we start? How do we get to the expectation of the law by the time students leave the South Carolina classroom? So here is what this looks like. This is the vertical articulation found in Appendix B of our standards document. If you're not familiar with our standards document, Appendix B houses a vertical articulation that lists the indicator expectations for a standard from kindergarten at the bottom all the way up through English 4. Here's the one for handwriting. If we look closely, we see that the expectations regarding handwriting can be found between kindergarten and 5th grade. In 6th grade, the statement says the standard is not directly addressed after 5th grade. That implies that by the end of 5th grade, students have met the expectation for handwriting for South Carolina students. Now, we meet the law, the Back to Basics law, by requiring fluent, legible, cursive writing skills by the end of 5th grade. That's what the law expects, and that's what our standards indicate. However, remember we were talking about how the expectations for the 2024 writing committee was that they created that vertical progression of how to get to that legible, fluent, cursive writing by the end of 5th grade. We see that beginning with an intentional focus for the first 3 years of a student's handwriting instruction being on print writing. So we see in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, we are asking our students to develop skills in print handwriting. And then in 3rd through 5th grade, students are developing that fluent and legible cursive writing. All right, now let's take a look at some definitions related to handwriting. So handwriting is that written communication with an instrument such as a pencil or pen, focusing on 4 criteria. The first being formation. Formation is how the student goes about forming the letters. That begins with straight lines and moving to curved lines. We'll look a little more closely at this when we get into our print section of the overview of handwriting. Next, we look at legibility. Legibility is how clearly the letters are formed and spaced. Sorry, my screen clicked away. Okay, then we take a look at pacing. Now, this is an interesting definition. Pacing deals with the use of the correct pencil grasp and press in order to help students sustain an appropriate pace in writing. So I think it's important to focus in that section part, the second part of the definition, with how students press the pencil into the paper to sustain that appropriate pace. And then finally, we see the aspect of handwriting being pencil grasp. And that is how the index finger and thumb hold the pencil against the middle finger. Now, knowing these different components of handwriting is very important as we move forward. You'll see these terms mentioned in the kindergarten indicator. So it's important for our kindergarten teachers to be familiar with these aspects of handwriting. Now, take a second and read this quote. I won't read it to you. So when we think about this quote, oftentimes we are asked, especially at the state, is can my students just learn to type because that's faster for students? Or, well, I mean, we live in a century where technology is at the forefront of everybody's mind. Why would they need to know handwriting? I think this quote underscores the importance of handwriting. Handwriting is probably among the most complex motor skills that the brain is capable of. In fact, several research studies were conducted about the impacts of handwriting versus keyboarding in a classroom. And students who were producing notes or producing work in their original handwriting retained and understood the information at a higher rate than those who were simply using a keyboard to record or produce that information. With that in mind, we want to think about how that might affect students in our classrooms. So for just a second, I want you to drop into the chat. Do your students in your elementary classrooms, do they type their notes or type their work, or do they type their notes and, or do they handwrite their notes or handwrite the work that they produce? Go ahead and drop into the chat how you see your students taking notes or producing work in your classroom. Brenna and Casey, my 2 backup screens just went out. So if you see anything popping in the chat, let me know.
Yeah, so most folks are saying handwriting is what they usually do until they get maybe to grades 3, 5 upper elementary. And then they are typing. Some say the only typing that they do is in preparation for SC Ready because they're going to need to know how to do that.
We hear that, yes.
Marcia said there's some new research out that shows that children ages 5 and 6 learn better with handwriting.
And those of you that have been in letters training, I'm sure you also, so Brenna, Casey, and I are also in letters training right now, and so much information is being shared with us and through the letters training about the importance of students doing that handwriting in order to map it in their brains. So we see that connection too. We're learning the letters, we're learning the letter sounds by drawing the letters. And so there's so much research to point to the impact that handwriting instruction has, especially print at those early ages. All right, now let's talk about why print or cursive. So, oftentimes we get this question as well. Some schools prescribe to the idea of only teaching cursive writing. Now, Brenna Casey and I have seen this in some private schools and charter schools where they begin cursive writing instruction in first grade, which seems wild to us, right? I do not remember having the capacity to learn cursive instruction at that age, but we do see that from place to place and from instance to instance. But in South Carolina, what we believe is that print writing should precede cursive writing. In fact, we believe that print writing lives in that kindergarten through second grade grade band because it so clearly connects reading to writing. If we think about the books that students are exposed to, the books that they read, the environmental print around them, the majority of that is presented in print writing. And so that's why we feel a passion to present our students handwriting instruction in print in that K through 2 grade band. Now, for cursive in South Carolina, those expectations live within 3rd through 5th grade. And one huge place where we feel validated in that decision is because it is required by law in our state for that cursive writing instruction to be mastered by the end of 5th grade. But along with South Carolina, 24 other states in the United States require cursive writing instruction in this grade band as well. So we're among good company with having those expectations. Now, Mandy did a lot of talking for the past 35 minutes. It's time for y'all to talk. We're going to have a time for a virtual turn and talk. Now, what this looks like is for part 1, I just want you in the chat to respond to the prompt that's going to come up in the yellow box. At the end of those 30 seconds, we'll ask you to respond by adding or connecting to another person's response in the chat. So here is your prompt. What is one piece of information from this section that you would take back to your school or district to share? So everyone in the chat, respond to the prompt. What is one piece of information from this section that you would take back to your school or district to share? While y'all are doing that, I'm going to see if I can get my other screens to pop up. Oh, I think they are. Brenna and Casey, will you read some of the responses?
So we have that handwriting is law, the importance of correct pencil grip, the 4 criteria of handwriting, the connections between handwriting and reading to writing, focus on writing K2 at the primary school level, making sure that handwriting is fully funded with the cursive materials that are available in the textbook, only being for specific grade levels. Let's see, prioritizing handwriting in classroom instruction, and the handwriting needs to start early because it helps with letter sound relationships.
Awesome. This is great feedback. Okay, now take the next 30 minutes or 30 seconds and respond to someone else in the chat. All right, now I can actually see your responses. Thank y'all for bearing with me as I was navigating all those shifts. Okay, awesome, awesome. Yes, I see some really great responses about the pencil grip. We're going to get into some of those details in this next section. So I'm so glad that y'all found that part interesting. All right, now let's move on to section 2. Now, section 2 is where we are going to discuss print, handwriting, and the aspects and facets of it that are important for our students, and any ways to support the print instruction for our students. So let's get started there. You'll notice that this corresponds to box 3 in your note catcher if you want to take any notes. So just like we looked at the vertical articulation in that first section, I laid it out a little differently. Now this is a horizontal version of that, but just for the kindergarten, first, and second grade indicators for handwriting. So again, this is AOR 6.1, Communication 6.1 for kindergarten, first, and second grade. Take a look at these indicator expectations. In kindergarten, you see all of those aspects of handwriting: pencil grasp, letter formation, legibility, pacing. Now, when we move to the first and second grade indicators, where do those expectations go? Do we no longer consider those as important? No, they're just part of that vertical progression. As with many of our standards and indicators in our ELA standards document, it's important for us to look at the standards vertically or in a progression, kind of like we see here with kindergarten, first and second grade. When I look at kindergarten, I see those aspects of handwriting: pencil grasp, letter formation, legibility, and pacing. Those terms are not used in the first and second grade indicators, but it's important if you are supporting student handwriting at those grade levels to still include those aspects of handwriting. And if you look up handwriting in our glossary, you'll see those terms used in the definition. So it's important for teachers to be familiar with that, no matter what grade level they are teaching to support handwriting. Now, another thing I want us to look at here is look at the first and second grade indicators. These indicators are the same. Does that mean that handwriting instruction does not change from first to second grade? No, obviously not, right? If you've been in our webinars before, you know that when we see an indicator say the same thing at 2 different or subsequent grade levels, typically what that does is that helps us imply that the difference in the expectation there is maybe the volume of what's being produced or read or created. Perhaps it deals with the complexity of what's being produced. Maybe in first grade, we're using producing CBC words with those uppercase and lowercase letters. And then in second grade, we're moving to more complex phonic patterns when we're producing those uppercase and lowercase letters. When we look at the first grade indicator, we also see an expectation for spacing of letters, words, and sentences. That looks very different from first grade to second grade because of the volume of work being produced. The spacing may look different when we move from writing a paragraph in first grade to maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs in second grade. So those handwriting expectations, especially in first and second grade, may look very similar, but that doesn't mean that the expectations are exactly the same. Now, what do we do if our students come to us before kindergarten or at kindergarten and they are not ready to hold a pencil and write? Here you see a cool diagram that explains what students should be able to draw and write in order to be ready to enter kindergarten producing legible handwriting. So let's take a look at some of this progression. At 3 years old, we see that they should be able to draw vertical and horizontal lines. At 3.5, they should be able to draw a circle. At 4 years, they should be able to draw crosses. When they get to 4 years, they should also be able to draw squares. Now, at 4 and 5, we see that they're able to produce slanted lines. In 5 years, they're making those diagonal cross lines. And then at 5th grade or at 5 years old, they're able to draw triangles. If you have students who enter kindergarten who maybe aren't able to quite hold a pencil or produce legible writing, this may be a place to lean in and practice. So, and even maybe your 4K teachers could benefit from this information as well. Are these skills that you can help those students to practice in order to be able to produce handwriting a little more easily? Hey, now let's also talk about how grip strength indicates success in handwriting. So students can improve maybe their digit strength or their fine motor skills by squeezing a squish ball or building with small block pieces, trying to open and close snaps or buttons, picking up small objects with tweezers or tongs, even doing jigsaw puzzles. Fine motor work can help develop digit strength that is necessary for handwriting success. So in the chat, drop and tell me some ways that you have seen teachers support digit strength, maybe in their kindergarten and 1st grade students. Anything that I didn't mention? Play-Doh, yes. Oh gosh, I love that. Yes, I'm so glad that y'all were thinking of that. Stretch those little hands before we start writing. Oh, I think that is such a wise decision too. But yes, Play-Doh is such a great way to build that digit strength. So that's a very good one. I love that. Oh, Angie, I love that idea. Ball up paper and then flatten it out using one hand. Oh, that is awesome. I bet that would also be helpful with maybe if a student is using hands interchangeably, seeing which of the hands they're more comfortable doing that activity with could help you with handedness. So that's really cool. I love that idea, Angie. Thank y'all. And as always, and with everything that we present to you today, we ask that you also um, reference or talk to your OT in your building. They are obviously the experts in handwriting and that development. And actually, our our OT at the State Department was consulted in the development of our handwriting support document. So they definitely had some input on the handwriting support document development, as well as what the actual standards and indicators say regarding handwriting. So OTs are always a great support. And I love, Mia, to hear that your OT has been going into classrooms. Oh my gosh, what a blessing to have that support in those early childhood classrooms. Awesome, awesome. Okay, now let's take a look at handwriting instruction. So, in South Carolina, there are 2 instructional materials that have been adopted to support handwriting instruction. Now, currently in South Carolina, the funding from our legislature only funds instructional materials supporting handwriting in print for 2nd grade. Now, we know that we would love to see an increase in that. And we'd love to see kindergarten through 5th grade fully funded for handwriting instructional materials. But at this point, these are the 2 adopted materials. Now, in kindergarten and 1st grade, your district can use local funds to purchase handwriting materials. And the 2 instructional materials providers in South Carolina are Zaner Bloser and Denelian. And here we just have a screenshot of the difference between the 2. If you'll notice, Zaner Bloser is what we typically see as print writing in an early childhood classroom. It's probably what you're most familiar with, or what I'm most familiar with. However, Denelian is also an accepted, adopted instructional material. Now, what you'll notice about it is that all of their print letters have a slanted or slight curve to them. And the expectation here is that the Denelian manuscript format lends itself to cursive as the next step because it has that slant already built in to the print writing. However, you in your local area, your district, get to choose which one of these two you adopt for your district. But I also want to give this disclaimer. In your instructional materials that support ELA instruction, now that's going to be like your Into reading or your SAVIS materials, your open court materials, those all also have handwriting support embedded in them. So if that's something that you're interested in at the kindergarten through second grade level, check your ELA reading and writing instructional materials and see what they have to offer to support handwriting instruction within those. Okay, so when and how do we teach print writing? Well, the first expectation of when and how we teach print writing is systematically and explicitly. There should be a scope and sequence or order to how you teach the letters and in which order you teach them. And that you should be doing this explicitly from my mouth to your ears as the student. So this is not something that you can just give them the book and have them practice the letter J that day. It needs to be something that you articulate for them and model for them. So another aspect of how we may teach print writing is alongside phonics. Now, again, if you've been in letters training, you've seen that when we can tie the letter formation to the sound production, students may learn it more deeply and better. So it's important to tie your print instruction along to your phonics whenever possible. This also can save you time. One complaint we often hear is, I'm already teaching 50 minutes of ELA or 120 minutes of ELA. How do I fit into that handwriting instruction as well? Well, if you can do that handwriting instruction alongside your phonics instruction, then you can double dip from both of those areas and potentially create connections for better lasting impact for your students. And then finally, one other way or one other area to consider in the handwriting support document is mentioned teaching print writing by stroke type. Now, your instructional material may provide more insight into the different stroke types. However, in our handwriting support document that we're going to take a look at in just a few pages, we'll see the different stroke types mentioned. Here you can see this is an excerpt from our handwriting support document that outlines that. So these are examples of letters with similar formations. Take a look at this chart. And then in your mind, I want you to try to draw these letters using just the example of how the letters are formed. An easy way to try to practice this is to look at that line that says letters you start by pulling down. So in my mind, I get my pencil and I'm ready to start pulling down my letters. So let's draw a lowercase I by pulling down. Okay, let's draw a lowercase j by pulling down. Let's draw a lowercase k by pulling down. Yes, it's so easy to see how these formations, these similar formations, can help draw pathways in your brain and for your students' brains to be able to form these letters. Practicing these in these ways also helps students to build confidence and stamina with those similar formations. All right, now let's take a look again at those 4 aspects of handwriting. They are formation, how the student goes about forming the letters. Legibility, how clearly the letters are formed and spaced. Pacing, which deals with the correct pencil grasp and press of the writing tool into the paper. And then pencil grasp, where it's how you hold the pencil in order to write. When we think about those, let's talk about some common issues that may come up. So when we think about pacing and pencil grasp, some issues that may come up are students' inability to create a pencil grasp. One way we've seen that supported in classrooms is through the use of a grip or a pencil tool to help them to know how to grip and hold their pencil. Now, there are multiple types of these that you can buy and explore, but I always suggest that you reach out to your OT for support in which of these pencil grips would be best for the students that you support. Now, another tool or trick that we've seen used with students is when students don't know where on the pencil to hold the pencil. I don't know if you have ever seen students holding a pencil maybe at the top or in the middle or down too far to the tip. I know I saw that in my classroom a good bit when I taught first grade. Students had just difficulty knowing exactly where to place their hand on the pencil. One trick we've seen to support that is by putting a sticker on the pencil where the grip is supposed to be held. So once students have that tripod grasp to holding a pencil, if you place a sticker on the correct part of the pencil that they are supposed to grasp, that kind of supports their handwriting development. So just a little tip and trick to try with your students. All right, now let's talk about legibility and spacing. One of the best ways to support legibility and spacing for your students is by the exposure to print. As students develop that print exposure in kindergarten and first grade especially, that awareness gives them that ability to leave appropriate space between words. If you see it in the big books that you read, you see it in the decodables that you read, and maybe you see it in the read alouds that are presented, even in your morning message, if you can model for them and show them good examples of spacing in their print, they are able to make that transfer into their own writing a little more easily. Also, I want to plug a connection here to one of our Foundations of Literacy standards for concepts of print. When students need maybe more support in understanding print, then it may be a good idea to take a look at Standard 2 in our Foundations of Literacy indicators, and those all support print concepts. Now, the next tool or trick that you may want to use is a finger spacing tool. We have two here. One of these looks like an actual hand with a finger pointed, where you would use it, or students would use it to put between each of the words in order to appropriately space between words. You might also see students using a popsicle stick that's decorated, or I think on your landing page in one of the sections down towards the bottom, there's even a printable for spacing that can be used. So you could print these on cardstock, laminate them, give them to your students, and they can be used as print spacing tools for handwriting support. Just a few ideas to support that legibility and spacing. Now, I want to hear from you. You are experts from all over the state. Drop into the chat any tools or tricks that you have learned to support legibility and spacing in the students that you serve. Additionally, as these come into the chat, you may want to add these to box 3 of your note catcher of those print notes of some stuff that maybe you want to use in the students that you support or with the students you support. Yeah, mine were definitely not green or have eyeballs or antenna, because can you imagine how much fun early childhood students would have with that? Yeah, I love it. Very good, y'all. I always come away with great ideas after seeing y'all's responses in the chat. Oh, a paper clip. That's a super easy way to do it. And I tell you what, we got about 1 million here at the agency if anybody needs any. Great idea, Lucy. Thank you. Popsicle stick student decorated. Hey, I love that. That's very learner centered. I like that, Kelly. And then you teach students how to use their finger, right? Because eventually we need to scaffold to like independence, right? We're not always going to have a finger spacer tool or a space Martian to leave our spaces. Very good. Okay. All right, let's keep going. Now it's time for, I like to think of it as a pop quiz, but really it's just scenarios. I'm going to present you with 3 scenarios. These all correspond to box 4 on your note catcher. And I want you to respond with what you would do as the expert in the classroom. Okay, here is our first scenario. A student enters your kindergarten classroom and has never held a pencil or crayon. Ah, where do you start your support? Go ahead and write that on your note catcher or share in the chat. What do we do? A student enters your classroom in kindergarten, never holding a pencil or a crayon. Ooh, I like that, Marcia. Yes, start chunky because that's where their pencil grip may be, those fine motor skills. Angie, I love it. Developing those fine motor skills. Get out the Play-Doh, get out the blocks, let them exercise those little fingers. Awesome, awesome. Now, once you have them holding a device, could we lean in and start practicing some of those line drawings or shapes that lead to print writing? Might be a place to support or start instruction. Very good. I love your scenario reflections. Thank y'all. All right. Scenario number 2. Now, this comes with a real life example. This is a real life example. So Brent and I both have kindergartners who are going into 1st grade next year. And this is Brenna's little girl's student writing example. So let's say that this is a student writing example that you are presented with. Okay. A student enters your 2nd grade classroom. Now, this is not a 2nd grade example, but for the sake of an example, that's what we used. And they are appropriately forming all their letters. But consider the sample below. Where should you start your support? Yay! I'm so glad you all see it so clearly. Yes, and Brenna, very good disclaimer. Yes, this was beginning of kinder, and she has grown so much this year. But spacing, this would be a student who would greatly benefit from a spacing tool. Maybe the ones you can purchase, or maybe just the stick or the popsicle sticks or the paper clips, but a tool to support spacing. They need explicit instruction in spacing, and then they need some practice with it as well. And Kelly, I love that you mentioned this. Yes, there are capital and lowercase letters scattered throughout the writing. So while the student is producing and forming all the letters appropriately, we need to talk about when to use capitals versus lowercase. So yes, and that's pretty appropriate for our kindergarten students, but would not be appropriate for 2nd grade. So definitely a place to lean in. Great job, great reflection. Now let's look at our 3rd example. Now, if you are not an early childhood teacher, I think you'll like this scenario. A student enters your 3rd grade classroom with no handwriting skills. Where do you begin your support? Do you begin with cursive or print? Now remember, this is a 3rd grade classroom. Lucy and Angie, you know, we had a great debate in this. So little behind the scenes thing. For all of our presentations, Brenna, Casey, and I, we do like a preview with each other. And we had such great conversation about this scenario because in some respects, well, you have to teach the grade level indicators, right? So they have to be instructed on cursive writing. However, if they don't have print, what does that do to their skill set? Does that mean that they'll never have those skills? Is that something that they're going to struggle with forever? You have to be able to write in print. And oh, me, I love the way you said it. Once that has gotten solid, then you can move to cursive. Lucy, I agree with you. I would still begin with print instruction. But this was a great debate that we had in our little ELA instructional group. And Casey made a good point that so this says third grade here, but what if it's somebody who's coming and they're from a different country where they wrote in Mandarin and they don't have experience writing in print? So what do you do then if it's English 2? What do you do if it's 8th grade? Is the answer any different depending on the grade level? And I think, Casey, do you want to speak on this that we all argued? Go ahead.
Sure. So I know that the way that our standards are laid out, we want our students to be proficient in cursive, by 5th grade. But I can speak from experience at the high school level that students are still coming, to high school with profound needs in terms of handwriting. And so we did have some debate about where we think we would start or how that instruction might shift or what that support might look like. So I'm very curious what this group thinks and tapping into your expertise.
Thank you, Casey. Very good. Okay. So I think we all are of the same heartedness that yes, we have to teach students grade level indicators, but this is a place where we have to go back and do the print instruction as well, because students have to have that in order to move on to cursive. Marcia, I love your connection to if they are reading on grade level. I think that you make a good point that there's a correlation between that reading and handwriting readiness. Oh, and are those high school students coming without the ability to write in print or cursive in that time frame when handwriting was not taught? Or when the law maybe was not followed? How about that? That's often something we talk about at the state when teachers say, well, we don't teach handwriting. Well, it's in the law. So we do teach handwriting. Okay, let's move on and let's get to cursive. Now, let's take a look at that cursive progression in our ELA standards. This is the indicator expectations for 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. Take a look at those handwriting expectations for 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. In 3rd grade, I think it's important to take a look that students are only expected in 3rd grade to write in cursive all uppercase and lowercase letters. Now, that does not imply generative writing pieces that must be produced in 3rd grade. Now, can you ask students to produce sentences or paragraphs in cursive in 3rd grade? Absolutely. That's your teacher autonomy. However, that's not the indicator expectation. In 4th and 5th grade, we do see the expectation for students to demonstrate fluent and legible cursive writing. I love the comment in the chat. Just nod to that. But the 4th and 5th grade indicator expectations say that they will demonstrate fluent and legible cursive writing skills that complies with our Back to Basics law, which requires handwriting and cursive writing in fluently and legibly by the end of 5th grade. So I have a little kind of provoking question here. What are the implications for striving handwriting skills for students in 6th grade and beyond? We kind of already talked about that with this last scenario that we explored. But if students are entering 6th grade and there's no longer an indicator expectation for handwriting, what does it mean if they still aren't producing fluent and legible cursive writing? That teachers need to do what? I think this implies that teachers must go back and teach indicators that were not mastered. So often a lot of the language for handwriting in our state, we've tried to make it not tied to any certain grade band or audience. Now, I know that this webinar is coming from your elementary ELA education associate, but the information being shared can go beyond the elementary level because students need to be able to demonstrate fluent and legible cursive writing by the end of 5th grade. That doesn't mean that it stops in 5th grade. Expectations can still be held for 6th grade and beyond. All right, so before 3rd grade, what is important for students to be able to know and do in order to enter 3rd grade ready to learn cursive writing? Well, the first is letter recognition. We know that students need to enter 3rd grade with the ability to recognize different letters, especially letters that are very similar in what they look like T's and I's and L's. Those look very similar, and they look particularly similar in cursive. So if we are able to recognize them easily in print, oftentimes that supports their cursive instruction. Also, the letters of U and W and E. Again, they often look similar in cursive writing, so it's important for students to be able to recognize the differences between those letters in print in order to be able to learn those in the cursive writing. Now, fine motor control is another aspect of cursive writing that is necessary for our students. So cursive writing requires a good grasp of a pencil and the ability to control the pen's movement with forming those loops and lines accurately. We'll look a little more closely at some practice for those loops and lines. Pencil control is important, and that's with the ability to draw straight lines and curves and loops. And it's essential to practice some of those skills before trying to tackle those letter connections that are built into cursive writing. And then basic letter strokes. And those are familiarity with strokes like the loops and the waves and the lines that are important in forming all of the cursive letters. So let's take a look at a chart that may help students and teachers with some of those basic letter strokes. Take a look here. These may be some places those first couple weeks of 3rd grade for you to begin practicing with your students to build some of that memorization and mimicry in hand movement so that when they do go to that explicit handwriting instruction, they have some of those skills already mastered. We see the use of swing ups, roller coasters, the hills and valleys, and the ocean waves. Now, if you give this to your students, they may think this is something fun, right? And it may be a good way for you to give this to students while you're organizing materials that first week of school, or you give this as an expectation as part of the time when you are doing some of those one-on-one assessments with students. So just a good place to support their ability to make those basic letter strokes before you start that explicit instruction. Similar to our print section, we have 2 different adoptions for handwriting instruction in our instructional materials. Again, it is Zahner-Bloser and Danielian. The Zahner-Bloser is a method that features like upright styles, but you'll see that the cursive is still slightly slanted. And in Danielian, we see very similar formation of the cursive letters. In fact, there are fewer differences between Danielian and cursive in cursive, I'm sorry, Danielian and Zahner-Bloser in the cursive writing. But these are the 2 adoptions for our state. Now, again, as we said earlier, only 1 grade in the 3 through 5 grade band is funded from the state for these instructional materials, and that's 3rd grade. So that means that 4th and 5th grade, where the fluent and legible cursive writing instruction is an expectation, those materials are not funded. Districts can use local funds to buy materials for that, but oftentimes instructional materials like your reading and writing main instructional materials into reading, Savas MyView, CKLA, those include a handwriting curriculum alongside them that may support that instruction at the 4th and 5th grade. All right, so when and how do we teach cursive writing? Systematically and explicitly. Have we heard that before? I think so. So the first 5 minutes would be the teacher introducing the letter and the stroke associated with it and modeling. The teacher will model, demonstrating how to form the letters and providing maybe students an opportunity to follow along or practice themselves. At some point during this workshop model, the teacher could differentiate by working with a group of students who may be having a challenge with formatting or forming the letter, or it may be that you have students who are ready to connect the letters that they're writing. But cursive writing should be practiced as students are engaged in word work activities as well. So when students are working with phonics or with morphology, as outlined in one of our AOR indicators, this would be a great place to practice your cursive writing instruction. All right, and then within content areas, now this is where we can bring in our friends who teach maybe the science, the social studies, or the math, and having students to practice cursive writing in those content areas. Now, the majority of us are generalists, right? We teach it all and we do it all in the elementary level. But if you have teachers that are content specific, it can be a great place for you to recommend, especially in 4th and 5th grade, that any writing that they are doing in math, science, or social studies, or even the arts, that there's an expectation that they use cursive writing for at least some of that, so that they have an independent time to practice cursive writing and the production of it. That just reinforces the learning that has explicitly and systematically taken place in your classroom. All right, now let's talk about the order of instruction. So it is suggested to teach lowercase letters first so that students can quickly begin forming words in cursive. If we think about cursive writing that students encounter, they more often encounter lowercase letters than uppercase. So it's important to teach lowercase first. This can also allow them to easily transfer that lowercase writing knowledge into word work and spelling because they already know all the lowercase letters in order to form and create the words that they're working on. Now, the next order of instruction would be using that 4-stroke approach that's outlined in your handwriting support document, and more detail is given to that there. But then finally, after you've taught the lowercase letters, after you've included a 4-stroke approach with teaching the different ways of forming the upper and lowercase letters, the next step would be connecting those letters. That instruction can begin in 3rd grade, but also is expected in 4th and 5th grade, where we're creating that legible and fluent cursive writing instruction. Okay, now let's take a look at a progression. Now, in the chat, Brenna, I think you can drop that there, but also on your note catcher in box number 6, you will see a document linked, and it's the cursive writing progression. This is an example, not an exemplar. This is just an example of what cursive writing instruction could look like according to our indicators. So according to South Carolina indicators, what could you do with cursive writing instruction in 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 5th grade? What we would like for you to do is take a look at this progression and respond to it using the C method. The first aspect of the C method is responding to any shifts you see. What are the major shifts in the progression from 3rd to 4th to 5th grade? Then we want you to respond to extensions. What extensions to your classroom or the classrooms that you support could you make from this progression? Is there anything that you see here that you think, oh, an extension I need to make is that I don't have materials to support this, or I don't have resources that teach that. I don't have built into my schedule how to do this. So extensions would be like extensions that would impact you or your classroom. Then I want you to put on that evaluator hat for the last step, and it is additions or adjustments. Is there anything in this progression that you think for the audience that you support, you would want to add or adjust? Maybe it's something that you don't think is relevant to the students that you support, or you see a place where you could add an expectation to the progression to better support your students. We are going to do this in breakout rooms. So you will either be in group 1, 2, or 3. All right. Now, when we look at spacing for letters, words, and sentences within our cursive writing, here are a few tips. When we take a look at spacing, again, exposure to cursive writing builds your awareness of how cursive should be spaced appropriately. So that spacing between the letters, the words, and the sentences, as students are exposed to cursive writing, they can build that awareness. Additionally, the exposure that they had to print writing in the K through 2 grade band also builds that awareness, because it's a very similar expectation, especially with the spacing between the words and the sentences. One way to help with spacing of the tall and short letters in cursive writing is a task called the line is lava. So you give a student a piece of handwriting and you have highlighted the lava lines, and the student's letters need to fit between the lava. They can't go above or below that, especially when creating words like that fit between those. So nothing that hangs below like tape, but like tall, took, to, and tied, all of those should fit between the baseline and the headline. All right. Now, what happens after 5th grade? The next activity is a task. So after 5th grade, students are encouraged to explore different handwriting styles and typing methods. So it may be that they use print or cursive, or they may use a digital method for producing quality work. Print, cursive, and typing are all valuable writing tools that help students to communicate and engage with others, but it's often left up to the expectation of the student to determine what is their purpose for writing and which format would work best. So this next activity, linked in box 7 of your note catcher, is a Venn diagram. We want you to access this Venn diagram and use the terms located on the right side: completing forms, taking notes, writing a grocery list, and so on. And we want you to sort them onto the Venn diagram in where you feel students should, where they should live. So when students are completing a form, should they do that in print, in digital, or in cursive? Or could it be a combination of all three? When students are taking notes, what format should their production take? Print, digital, or cursive? So go ahead and create that Venn diagram. We're going to give you about 5 minutes, and then we're going to talk about how we decided to sort those. So go ahead and complete your Venn diagram independently. Again, I want you to be ready to talk to me about it at 11:32. Now, let's move to the end of this section on cursive writing. We're going to go into a little reflection time called the TQA. In box 8 of your note catcher, I want you to reflect what is one thought, question, or aha you have from this section on cursive writing. So, on your note catcher or in the chat, tell us what is a thought you have on cursive, a question you still have lingering about cursive handwriting, or an aha that you have about cursive. So go ahead and drop that into the chat or put that on your note catcher. If you feel comfortable, though, share it with us. Or if you want to unmute and share, I'd love to hear y'all's voices as well.
one of the things that we discussed in our breakout room was an adjustment or addition. I guess it'd be an adjustment. If fifth graders could respond in cursive for their TDWs for SC Ready versus typing, if the expectation is for them to be fluent and have a writing piece. So I still have a wonder about that.
That's a great question, Kelly. We can share that idea with our assessment partners. I like that.
Please do.
Oh, interesting. Cursive is whole words, manuscript is letter by letter. Yeah. Okay. That's a very interesting way to think about that. Lucy, I agree that need for reading cursive. I don't know that that was ever, I taught third grade several times, and that was never a focus of instruction. I know that they were presented several primary documents, maybe in their science and social studies text, but I don't remember that ever being like a learning expectation. So, that will definitely be something for me to lean into to support students. Ways we can integrate that easily. And thank goodness we have Reese here to help embed some of that. Oh, okay, Marcia Baxter. I like your feedback on in third grade, maybe after Christmas, your morning message could be in cursive. So even if you were doing those digitally, like on a slide deck, you could still have that text produced in cursive font. I think that's a great idea because that builds that expectation of reading cursive. Great expectation. All right. Now let's move to the final section where we finally get to take a look at that handwriting support document. So, with much labor of love, the handwriting support document for the 2024 South Carolina College and Career Ready ELA Standards is here today. It is linked on your note catcher currently, and eventually it will be linked on our instructional resources page. That is moving just a little bit behind the schedule for our presentation today, but you lucky attendees get the first look at it in its full, complete glory. So how exciting. What a great thing for being here today. So Brenna's also dropping that into the chat. It's linked on your note catcher as well, but we're so excited that you get to view this today. Now, what you can expect to see in the handwriting support document. It gives the purpose for why we teach handwriting in print and cursive in South Carolina and connections to that back to basics law that we are meeting by including Communications 6.1. It also gives some insight into Aries phases and the connections to those alphabetic stages and development for our students and how handwriting can develop based on that research. It gives explicit expectations for teaching handwriting, including instructional resources, examples, and ideas. It gives some insight into the evaluation of handwriting, where some of y'all were talking about giving students feedback on their handwriting for the specific areas that they need support or different ways to tackle and evaluate student produced handwriting. There's some ideas for that in the handwriting support document as well. And then finally, there is grade band specific support within this handwriting support document. So hopefully you will find it to be a great resource. And in our next 10 minutes, we're going to give you time to do a must do, may do. So for the must do, we want you to explore the handwriting support document. This is linked in section 9 of your note catcher. So you'll read and take a look at the handwriting support document. And then some things that you may do right below box 9 on your note catcher, there are green resources that are resources to support print instruction and yellow resources to support cursive instruction. So a lot of these resources do come from our neighbor, Georgia. Georgia has very extensive handwriting support for their state that was funded through their public broadcasting system. So there are actually videos to support the instruction of each print and cursive letter. Oh, they're incredible. So if you're interested in those resources, take a look at those. But then there's also some other print and cursive resources mixed in. Again, they are color coded. So the green boxes support print instruction. So if you're a K through 2 teacher, that may be where you want to spend your time. And then the yellow boxes are cursive resources. And if you're a 3 through 5 teacher, that may be where you want to spend your time. So for the next 10 minutes, you have this must do, may do activity time. You feel free to turn your cameras off and take your 10 minutes to explore your must do and may do. When you come back, we will be sharing one of these reflections in the chat. I'll go ahead and leave this slide up. So as you're going through your must do, may do, think about any of these resources and how they may change your perspective, make you more aware of, or make you consider a next step in one of the following. So we'll start the clock, and at 11:51, be prepared to drop one of these reflections into the chat. You have 10 minutes to explore the handwriting support document and the print or cursive resources on your note catcher. As we move to the end of our presentation, I want you to think about your next step with this information and your plan. So on box 10 of your note catcher, a lot of you already kind of put that in your reflection in the chat, but what could be your next step to include handwriting instruction at your grade level? If that's a place where maybe you have not had a chance to focus in recent years, what are some ways that you could see an easy way to integrate handwriting instruction into your classroom or into the classrooms that you support, especially in that phonics and word work section of your day, or in some of the produced pieces that you have your students producing. So hopefully you see ways to integrate handwriting instruction throughout your instructional day. And then if you have time, just record your plans for how you see handwriting fitting in to the instruction in your classroom. We won't linger too much longer though, because we only have 7 minutes left. So let's get to some clarity and closure. So for our clarity and closure today, we're going to use the triangle, circle, and square. On your note catcher, I want you to reflect. What are 3 important ideas that you can take away from this session today? What is circle, something that's still circling around in your mind, or what are you still trying to understand? Is there a place on the handwriting support document that you want to go lean into over the next couple months before you start back into your new school year? Or is there something that squares up or matches up with your thinking or values in supporting handwriting instruction? Drop those into the chat or record those on your note catcher in box number 11. But we feel that clarity and closure is such an important part of our presentations. We want you to be able to synthesize the information that you heard today and put it into your own words. So I'll give you just a minute to complete that triangle, circle, and square. All right, today's purpose was to explore the indicator expectations for handwriting and our ELA standards, and then to support you with some instructional support in handwriting instruction using that handwriting support document. Hopefully you see that we met those purposes today throughout our 2 hours together. I can't believe we used the whole 2 hours today, but we will end our time together today with a little bit of feedback. If you will, please complete the feedback form. This also ensures that you receive your recertification credit from our time together today. So go ahead and you can click on the link in your note catcher, or you can use the link that I think Brenna is dropping into the chat, or use the QR code that is linked on the slide deck right here. But complete that feedback form. Give us feedback about this presentation and any lingering questions that you still have or things that you still need from us to support handwriting in our state. But we are just thankful that you spent time with us today, especially on May 29th at the end of the school year for most schools. So we're just thankful that y'all are here. We appreciate your attendance and your participation today. Brenna, Casey, and I will listen and linger for a few more minutes if you have any questions, concerns, or comments. Otherwise, y'all are free to go and have a great summer. Thank you again for being with us today.